Thanks for joining us for this episode, and I do want to remind you to make sure that you are following us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you may listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance, and you can actually watch video versions of each episode. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review and share this content with other pastors and church leaders. We want to help as many of these folks as we can, and so we'd really appreciate you sharing this episode with your friends. Well, thanks again for joining us as we begin today's episode and continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Bryan Sams.
Women are clearly in the Bible not to exercise authority over men in the teaching and leadership of a local church. So I think it's really cut and dry. Now, do we not, though, acknowledge that there is some latitude in how we utilize women in ministry? Or would anybody even try to suggest that at some level women should not be in the ministry? And I take real issue with that. There's a difference between having spiritual authority and leading a church or being the primary preacher or teacher of a church and having a role with real responsibility within the church. For instance, I would never call a woman a children's pastor, but my church, like many others, has a woman leading the children's ministry. So we call her the children's director. She is operating within her biblical scope, Titus, of teaching children the Bible. Furthermore, she has absolutely no authority or never teaches with any authority for our entire church. Additionally, I have a women's ministry leader. She's a woman. I don't call her the pastor of women's ministries or pastor of women's counseling. She's simply the director of women's ministry. She does teach, and she does so within the responsibility of older women teaching younger women in the church as directed by Titus. So should women have a role in ministry? Of course. Should they have the role of pastor and spiritual authority in the ministry? And that answer is, of course, no. And I think, now, again, if a church is functioning like women are in the pastoral role, they should be, I think, unaffiliated with the SBC. And I certainly don't think they should be funded. And in those cases where those have been unchecked, I would urge the SBC to take action. And as I think they've demonstrated that they will and do, and I think it's just a little bit premature, it's a little trigger happy to look at a 47,000 church member organization and expect that quickly every single time there's going to be everything functioning exactly like, in fact, one of the things I thought about when I was thinking about this is, the church, the SBC is massive, of course. And I mean, Pastor Chappell certainly would understand us from the perspective of pastoring a mega church. And although he operates in some ways unlike many megachurches, where he very much does attempt to pastor people, although it's incredibly difficult, I think Pastor Chappell would understand that not everybody who is, quote unquote, a member of Lancaster Baptist Church is believing what he believes and is living like their church membership would expect or require. It's just not. It's not that it's a bad church. It's a great church. The problem is it's just almost impossible to manage on that level and to oversee so clearly every individual person. And I think on a macro scale, same thing with the SBC, there is a process, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to report and go through the process of having a church disavowed. There is a process of assessment within those who are going to receive funding. But man, goodness, to expect that everything is perfectly tidy and that there's no rebels in the team and there's no church members that don't need discipline is a little naive. So I would say, first of all, Pastor Chappell, I completely agree with your assessment. Secondly, I would say this: there is a process by which you can report a non-cooperating church through a portal. As illustrated in the article that you referenced, the pastor from Virginia that you referenced in this book does have the opportunity to mention to a committee that there are churches out of line with the Baptist faith and message. As I'm sure you can imagine, it would be nearly impossible to quickly keep tabs and execute decisions on all 47,000 SBC churches. There's just no simple way that you could possibly keep up quickly with all the members of even your own church and know exactly if they're in fellowship with Christ, live in obedience to his word, and an absolute doctrinal alignment with you at all times. You deal with individuals and situations as they surface. I am quite certain that in a church as large as yours or organization as large as SBC, there are people living in sin. There are people who have different doctrinal issues. I would not question your integrity of your institution, pastor, based on one or two derelict members. I would assume that you would be in the process of cleaning your house. And I think the same grace should be given toward the SBC. Number 3, you need to remember that all SBC churches are autonomous, similar to Independent Baptists. Although we are lumped together officially in an association, we are not necessarily lumped together in responsibility. You probably don't concern yourself with what ministries another ministry supports or does not support. It's the beauty of autonomy. This is quite frankly a deal breaker against the overall argument of this entire booklet and the overall argument of the whole SBC issue as a whole. And that is this: Pastor Chappell, I don't hold you responsible for the actions of Jeff Fugit or Steven Anderson or Jack Trieber or Andrew Sluter. It's ridiculous to question the integrity of a gospel-preaching Orthodox Baptist brother who is committed to the Great Commission and sound doctrine just because he's affiliated with somebody that we don't agree with. This is classic second-degree separation, third-degree separation, where I separate from somebody because of somebody they're affiliated with. I would say this: if I believe a church planner is faithful and orthodox, etc., why do I care where funding comes from? Do you, independent Baptist pastors, do you check the logs of who all is supporting whoever else? I mean, what if I was a church planner and I was receiving $1,000 a month from my rich uncle who's an atheist? Would you actually care? Would you support me? So if I am an independent Baptist pastor and I am supporting a guy who also has received funding from an SBC entity or any other entity for that matter, do I really think I'm compromising because I'm willing to support a brother that I believe in? Or are we so committed to perfect alignment that we literally could not support somebody because of who they're also receiving funding from? So I think that's a real issue here. Number 4, and I've already kind of said this, pastor has absolute legitimate concerns of the direction of some Southern Baptist churches. I have the same concerns. However, this is no different than you having concerns about certain independent Baptist brothers or sisters and churches. Why don't we call out the issues without calling into question the integrity of the individual institution? I think this is one of our biggest problems. I think we tend to, quote unquote, throw the baby out with the bathwater and strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. And I want to say that just because there are some differences within an organization so large, the largest Protestant denomination in the world, I do not think it is time to just discard altogether them, especially knowing the amazing and powerful work of the conservative resurgence that still, since the 1980s, there's not been a liberal president of the SBC or a liberal president of an SBC seminary, which were the issues of those days. To just come, and I would ask you this question, Pastor Chappell, or anybody else for that matter. What about Adrian Rogers and Jerry Vines and Johnny Hunt, some of these other men in the past that led in a resurgence of biblical fidelity? And I know this from experience that in the 90s, 2000s, the Independent Baptist rank and file were not in fellowship with these men, at least publicly. And there's some gross inconsistencies with so many people and what they support and who they preach with and who they preach for. It's just not public. The problem that most people have with me is I'm just willing to talk about it. I'm okay to be public about it because I have nothing to hide. And I think that so many guys and girls discard completely faithful men and women in these institutions that are fighting and striving for biblical fidelity. I think it's an enormous grievance of the Holy Spirit even to just lump them all together and just say everybody's bad. Look, I think all of us would be proud and glad to be affiliated with the likes of Adrian Rogers and so on and so forth. And there are many to this very day within the Conservative Baptist Network, even those that are outside of that, that are for the inerrancy of Scripture, for the exclusivity of the gospel, for the Great Commission. And I think it is dangerous. Now let me kind of wrap this by sharing with you some of the things I believe to be positives about cooperative funding of the Great Commission. Number one positive about cooperative funding is the deputation process is exchanged or limited for a thorough assessment process. A candidate is found to be ready for missions and adequately trained for ministry, then they are fully funded. And no matter what you make of this, okay, no matter what your conclusion is of what I'm saying, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I want you to know that I believe, and I think we can all agree on this, there are some real challenges and problems with Independent Baptist deputation. And I think that these things should be challenged, and I think alternatives should be presented, which I'll present one. I want to read from a Facebook post article from November 27, 2023 by Pastor Ryan Thompson from out in California. And he talks about deputation and some of the challenges. Listen to this. Imagine traveling to 100 to 200 churches of varying size, styles, flavors, philosophies on a plethora of issues while seeking to raise financial support for the work God's called you to do. You've said yes to leaving family, friends, and everything comfortable to travel to a foreign field in which God has called you. You long to partner with Bible-believing churches to impact the uttermost part of the earth as God has called you. You are Orthodox, Bible-believing. You believe the fundamentals of the faith. Yet you feel like some of the second or third tier beliefs are on trial regularly. You feel the pressure to fit in, to agree on everything in which you're in without being dishonest or duplicitous, even though those churches don't agree with each other on the same issues. Sometimes it seems like you have to hide who you are in order to be accepted by the wide array of churches you are partnering with. You feel the pressure for your family that has to be perfect while traveling in a van, plane, or small RV for tens of thousands of miles over the course of several years. Your wife may carry a baby the entire 9 months on the road and then travel with a weeks-old newborn as you crisscross the country. Your children are expected to get dressed up and sit still in church 4 or 5 nights per week, every week of the year. being the perfect model of joy and obedience, even though they've slept in 7 different beds in 3 different time zones over the past week. You reach out to dozens of pastors just to line up for one meeting. I don't know what the stats are, but they're terrible. I was with a missionary recently who, just to check, called over 100 churches in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and was acting like he was just interested in the church and received 0 phone calls back. I mean, just to think that churches are so unresponsive. Then as you come in asking for money, it can even be worse. I can't tell you how many guys, even though most of them that call me, I write them back and say, I'm sorry, I can't support you right now. How many of them write back and say, thank you for just responding? Back to the post here. You're nervous about posting anything about a family vacation or personal purchase for fear you might present living extravagantly or misusing God's money. Even we as pastors regularly post trips, blessings, and purchases that we have enjoyed. American pastors are allowed to buy guns, go hunting, attend sporting events, get new cars, and take time to unplug in Hawaii. But missionaries should never do this because of mismanagement of resources. Didn't you know that? This is a solid evaluation. And then this is the worst part. One wrong move could lead to the loss of 25, 50, or even more support that your family depends on to survive. And you have 100 different pastors with 100 different opinions of what a wrong move might be. This is the plague of traditional deputation. I believe that it needs to be fixed. I'm going to suggest a solution here in just a moment. But guys, the deputation process needs to be reevaluated. Now, I know some people that rejoice in it. They think it's great. I've even heard some pastors say, I think it's good proving ground for missions. I think it's terrible proving ground. I think that it needs to be rethought and refocused for the sake of the gospel and the health of the missionary. Number 2, the second thing I love about cooperative funding is there's extraordinary support systems within the cooperative program, from teams to counselors to significant help with medical issues that rise. I have a missionary right now that's with IMB and attends our church. Their daughter in India, they're actually getting ready to go back here in just a few days, actually. Their daughter was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The IMB quickly and swiftly provided their transportation and care for their health needs without even the need to raise one additional dollar for the churches. I am amazed at the team structure and the support structure within these organizations to help. My guys that have received North American Mission Board funding have just been blessed, whether it's resources. The other day, our church planners got a gift to take their wife out to dinner. There are local healthy conferences and meetings to attend to further sharpen their skills and to get rest and refreshment, constantly being checked on, constantly being helped. And I think those support systems are better than the financial support because, as we all know, ministry can be lonely. Number 3, a missionary does not suffer because of the minute differences between churches that support them. As you well know, a church that drops their support of missionary can have devastating effects on that missionary. For instance, if my church supports a missionary for $250 a month, and the need of that missionary is $5,000 a month, then removing $250 is a 5% reduction in their monthly income, and re-raising of funds adds an enormous stress to missionaries already on the field. Missionaries should not be concerned that their support comes and goes with the ups and downs of the individual church in America. And again, I mean, even just on a real practical front, man, things change. Churches lose their support. Churches lose their. I mean, we're so dependent on individual churches. But what about the economic downturn of those churches? I know a large church here in Jacksonville that literally eliminated their entire missions program when they were going through a economic downturn. What are you going to do? Are you going to stop paying your lights? Are you going to stop paying your missionaries? And I think holding people hostage to this is a real problem. Number 4, there can be no question that within the autonomy of local churches, churches can also support or not support the cooperative program. In fact, of the 47,000 churches within the SBC, my understanding is there's only about 20,000 that support the cooperative program. Me, as an affiliated church, I'm under no obligation to support the cooperative program. In fact, I can choose to designate any sources that I want to go directly to the missionaries or church planters. This is why the Lottie Moon offering and the Annie Armstrong offering go directly to church planters and directly to missionaries. In fact, our church has chosen to support those entities directly as opposed to a cooperative program because we don't want any of our money going to things like the ERLC, which Pastor mentions in his book, or just the administrative oversight. While I'm not naive, every mission organization has oversight and administrative costs. But I love the fact that I get to choose to do that. I want my money to go straight to missionaries and church planters, and I have the liberty to do that. And I think sometimes churches get criticized because they get locked into this one specific model or one specific way of doing it. It's just not the case. So I hope I've been fair here in my assessment of the article. I want to say a couple other things. I think, I mean, the book was sent to Aaron Chan, who's a church planter out of my church, discouraging him from what he was doing. I guess one of the final questions I would ask, are we really displeased with people who do this? Shouldn't we all have the liberty as independents to choose the sourcing of our funding? Do we really think that deputation alone is the best solution? I don't think so. So here's my solution. I do not believe the answer is an either or answer. I believe the answer is in both. I believe that churches should support networks, and I believe that individuals raising support should receive help from networks or denominations, individuals, churches. I think it should be kind of a conglomerate approach. Our church does support North American Mission Board and International Mission Board, but we also support many individual causes, projects, and missionaries heavily. For instance, our church individually supports 20% of our missionary to Paraguay. 20% of their overall support comes from just our church because he's from our church. Our church planners this year, but outside of NAM funding and very small amount of other churches, we took on the bulk of the support of those missionaries. In fact, in the second year of Aaron Chan's church plant, our church will give $2,000 a month to get them to autonomy in 2025. So we're invested in multiple ways. In fact, this is the solution. Man, find a network. I love what Healthy Church Network is doing and other networks out there. And in many cases, you can be duly, triply aligned. Receive NAM funding if you want. Partner up with a Healthy Church Network or Pillar Network or some other network that you are doctrinally aligned with. Raise some support from churches as you can. Get some individuals in your corner. And if you're a local church pastor sending missionaries, by all means, give of your very best of your finances to help missionaries go forward. And I want to say one final word commending Pastor Chappell for an enormous amount of money that they've given to missionaries and been such a blessing, and his efforts to plant churches in California, to network guys together. And we'll link to that effort, that website. I think he's doing a great job. I just would rather see us not being so critical of one small sliver of the overall Great Commission funding causes. Man, I'd love your feedback on this. This is a huge discussion. A lot of people are talking about this. A lot of people are concerned about this. And I hope and pray that God will give us all clarity that we can do more for Jesus for the Great Commission of the days to come. God bless you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and we really would appreciate it if you could leave us that 5-star review, and then of course share this content with your friends. We want to help as many pastors and church leaders as we can, and be sure to of course Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. And go ahead and subscribe to the Church Advance YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance. This podcast is hosted by Bryan Sams. It is co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and the team at mustincrease.com. If you want to connect with Bryan, be sure to head over to his website at bryansams.com. Well, we really look forward to seeing you again in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Bryan Sams.